DB pension failures have been making headlines recently, casting into the spotlight the support that members receive. So joining me now to discuss DB transfers and also how best to protect members is Jonathan Watsley, who's the Director at Wealth at Work. So Jonathan, it's good to have you with us today.
Hi.
So let's start then with DB transfers. And why is there this interest by members?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One of the key reasons is because the transfer values that are on offer. It's not unusual at the moment to see 30 or 40 times income. So I think people are almost quite overwhelmed by the fact that they could be getting £20,000 worth of income in retirement, or they could be getting a transfer of £800,000, and they probably can't see beyond that £800,000 because it's such a phenomenal amount of money. So I think it's the multiple that is attracting a lot of people. But I think there are some other reasons as well. I think there's the issue of people wanting flexibility. So since freedom and choice came in, I think there is definitely a cohort of people that say, well, actually, I'd rather have that money in my own pension account, that I can do whatever I want with it. And for some people, that will be around inheritance tax, because rather bizarrely now, pensions are quite a good inheritance tax planning tool if you've got other assets that you can live off of. And I think probably the other thing as well is that a lot of people that are in DB schemes, they read the headlines, they see what's been going on with BHS and British Steel, more recently Carillion, and I think there's just this issue of like, I'd rather metaphorically have that money in my own back pocket than leave it in the scheme where they believe it has some danger of maybe not getting that money, even though that could of course be misplaced in most cases.
So then what could schemes, trustees and indeed employers do better?
Well, I think there's a number of things. The first thing is, do people need to go straight to regulated advice? Because even though the rules say that if you've got a value of £30,000 or more in a DB scheme, you must take advice. The question is would guidance help them before they make that decision on advice? So we would urge employers and schemes to look at that, because that guidance can give people the advantages generically and the disadvantages generically of moving out of a DB scheme, which may then influence people to say, well, actually, this isn't really for me, and therefore not go for the advice. But if they do go for the advice, they understand what's they're going for it. So I think there's that issue. I think there's also an issue about employers and schemes actually going and getting reputable firms to do the advice. We've seen the factory gating down in South Wales. We've seen some of the extortionate charges that are being made, whereas actually if the schemes and the employers went out, found advisors that could deliver this, did their due diligence, did their compliance checks, looked at the compliance processes, agreed a price that employees would ultimately pay, I think that would really help make the whole process far more robust. And thirdly, I think the whole idea of partial transfers. Currently, only about 15% of schemes allow partial transfers, whereas actually, if that became much more widespread, then actually maybe there'd be a much more better managing of risk, where people would say, well, actually, I do want to transfer some of it, but I'm happy to leave some of it where it is, and that might be a better outcome for all.
What dangers do you see in the current market?
I think there's a number, really. I think that there's, if you like, quite an over-egging of transfers, and you see this even in bulk exercises, where it's not just the individual waking up one morning and deciding they may want to transfer, but actually where the scheme and the employer is saying, well, let's look to see if we can do a bulk transfer of people out of the scheme. And some of them that we've seen, the expectation of numbers of people that will transfer out, to us, in a lot of cases, seem very, very high. So I think there's almost this expectation of the numbers that should transfer, which perhaps is beyond where they should be and beyond reality. Of course, you never know until you meet those individuals and understand their individual circumstances. I think we've also seen examples of where there's been factory gating, so maybe localized advisors, maybe one or two man bands pitching up at a workplace, and all of a sudden transferring out quite a large number of people. And when you look at what happens to that money, where does it go? We've got a lot of examples of where it's going to like a single provider, a single insurer. So it raises a red flag there, really, saying, well, hold on a minute, why are insurers taking all this transfer money, which often, because it's large sums, can run into millions and millions of pounds in total? Why is there not a red flag going, well, hold on a minute, here's a one-man band or a two-man band advisor. We've hardly had any business from them before. Now, all of a sudden, we're getting millions of pounds worth, and it's all DB transfer. To me, that sounds like a bit of a red flag, which probably should be addressed.
And the likely impact on individuals, what would you say there?
Well, I think there's a number of issues here. I think that a lot of individuals will probably transfer and perhaps they shouldn't. We've already seen the numbers from the FCA, where in some research they did quite recently where they were sampling cases, they suggested that roughly half of those perhaps were unsuitable. So that's an alarm in itself. I think there's also the issue of individuals who, even if maybe they're advised that they shouldn't transfer, that the individual says, well, it's my money, I want to transfer anyway. So the insistent client issue, which I think then plays back to partial transfers, because actually maybe there's some balancing of that risk if actually they would accept a partial transfer, if they were allowed to do it, of course, but by the scheme. And I think there's also issues around what the individual does with that money once it is transferred. One of the concerns that we have is that as people go into retirement, if they're in drawdown, for example, well, are they getting ongoing advice? What happens 10, 15, 20 years into retirement? Particularly, we know cognitive ability reduces as people get older, so how is that being managed? So I think there's quite a lot to be concerned about.
Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you.